Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's New in Historical Fiction, a regular panel series featuring historical novelists with new and upcoming titles. I'm really glad to have this panel. Two of these authors are history through fiction authors, and so I'm excited to talk about those books. And of course, we have Kyra and Marie as well with their books. If this is your first time joining What's New in Historical Fiction, I have allowed your cameras. You can toggle them on or off. You cannot turn on your mics. It just helps us to avoid any distractions. But if you do want to interact with us, you can do that via the chat. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a couple chat bubbles. And if you click on that, it'll open up a panel on the side of your screen where you can say hello. So actually, why don't you go ahead and say hello? Let us know where you're joining us from, and maybe what you're reading right now. Other than that, it should be pretty straightforward. I do have a landing page with all of our panelists' books on that landing page. So if you want to learn anything more about the panelists' books, you can go there. So I just posted that in the chat, and I'll post that again later during the event. Those link back to bookshop.org. So if you want to buy the title, you can buy it from bookshop.org, and we support that because bookshop.org gives a portion of the sales to independent bookstores, and that's really important for the literary community. But even if you can't buy it, just get it from your library, request it through interlibrary loan, tell your friends about it. That would be great. That would be very helpful to our authors and our independent publishers like us. Okay, without further ado, then, I am going to move myself from the screen and I will introduce all of our panelists. Okay, Kyra, if you could say hello and let us know about your novel, The Great Mann.
Hi, my name is Kyra Davis Lurie. I wrote The Great Mann. It is a 1945 Los Angeles-based Black reimagining of The Great Gatsby, set in the historic neighborhood of LA's Sugar Hill, where African Americans of affluence lived in these mansions, and Hattie McDaniel would throw these gala Gatsby-esque parties, which was sort of the impetus and inspiration for this.
And it's fabulous. I read it, and I'm going to say it's fabulous.
And if you can't trust you, Alina, who can you trust? Okay, she's this is a big compliment.
Thank you, Kyra. Marie, if you could say hello and let us know about your book, The Troublesome Book Club for Women.
Yeah, hi, I'm Marie Bostwick, and my book is The Book Club for Troublesome Women. It's set in a planned community in Northern Virginia in 1963. All the four main characters are all homemakers. When one of them decides to start a book club to try and get to make new friends, one of the other characters insists that the first book should be the Betty Friedan's 1963 blockbuster, The Feminine Mystique. So that's the book they start with, and it changes everything.
Very good elevator pitch. Got me interested. Chad, if you could say hello and tell us about Notes from a Deserter.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chad Towarnicki, and I am the author. Actually, I have a copy as well. The author of Notes from a Deserter. And basically, the premise of the novel is based on researching a grave on a nearby property, actually right over here in the woods. And I researched the individual who's buried there and followed him to Fredericksburg, where he fought for the Union, and deserted and walked back up to Perkiomenville, Pennsylvania, where I live. And in a botched citizen's arrest, he ended up arrested, and a bounty hunter was killed. And he was the only Civil War soldier hung at Fort Mifflin throughout the Civil War. So it's literally excavated from my backyard, and very thankful to have it in print.
Thanks, Chad. Yeah, a lot of very interesting elements there. I can't wait to talk more about it. Alina Adams, if you could say hello and tell us about Go On Pretending.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alina Adams. You can see the book cover both over my shoulder and over Colin's shoulder, so we get it both ways. The book is a family saga that takes place during three key time periods. The first one is in the 1950s in Madison Avenue in the golden age of the radio soap operas as they transition to television. And as you can imagine, that may not have been too great of a move. You know, we hear about actors who couldn't make the transition from silent movies to talkies because their voices didn't work. Well, what about the opposite? What if you have African American radio actors and now their character is being taken over to television? The second section takes place in Moscow, USSR in 1957, where yes, the Soviet Union threw a pro-democracy festival. That was something that actually happened. And the third section takes place in Rojava, which is an area of Syria and Kurdistan, where they had a women's revolution, where women's armies are literally to this day keeping ISIS at bay, and it's a completely feminine-driven revolution. So those are the three time periods where three generations of women find themselves dealing with history as it happens to them.
Thank you, Alina. Well, let's go back to Kyra. As Alina already said, this is a Black version of The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby has been done and redone so many different times. I guess a two-part question: why did you decide to do remake it, and how is it alike and different from the original?
So, as I said, the impetus for this was when I heard the story of Sugar Hill, which West Adam Heights, which is what it was called initially, it was always it had been Los Angeles' Beverly Hills before we had the Beverly Hills, and all the white aristocracy of Los Angeles lived there. And then the Depression comes, people are having a hard time maintaining their mansions, and they needed to sell, or some of them needed to sell. And the only people that had money to buy were the newly wealthy African Americans, the Hollywood elite, the Black Hollywood elite, business moguls, oil tycoons. And they were living this, what we would think of as more lavish lifestyle. You know, again, these gala events where Hattie McDaniel has Bing Crosby and Lena Horne and Duke Ellington is her entertainment. She has a chauffeur. People are walking around in their minks and their diamonds. And again, it had a very Gatsby-esque feeling to me, except it's real and it's Black. And I am a huge Fitzgerald fan. And his insights, his societal insights are fascinating, particularly when it comes to both the attraction and repulsion of conspicuous displays of wealth. He wasn't very enlightened when it came to race or minorities. There is one little line in there, a little paragraph, where he mentions he's passing in a car with Gatsby, and he sees it's a limousine. In the back seats, there's three Black people, as he refers to as two bucks and a girl, and they roll the yolks of their eyes over in haughty rivalry. It's there as sort of a point of humor that Blacks would have this kind of wealth and luxury, as well as a way of showing that this place is so outlandish and preposterous that even Black people could be living like that. But of course, that was 1925. It wasn't that long after, say, the Tulsa race riots, where Black Wall Street, where people had been living with that kind of wealth, had seen it completely burned down. And so and look, through Fitzgerald's personal correspondence, there's definitely pretty definitive evidence of his feelings about minorities, but I can't separate the man from the art. I can hold a lot of love for the art of a very flawed man, which I do. And nonetheless, I want to take those themes, those very American themes of wealth and privilege and new money, and see what that looked like real. I mean, how it really looked like in this very rarefied African American community. And to explore this very familiar American story as a way of elevating this little known piece of Black history. So it felt like a very natural pairing. Now, there's been 50 million reinventions of The Great Gatsby, film, plays, books, everything. So the question really is, there's never a need, but do you have a purpose? And so that is my purpose here. And it's definitely follows the main characters, but definitely follow that basic outline of the Gatsby story, but there's a lot else going on. One of the things that makes that neighborhood so fascinating is that the white neighbors were trying to use the racial covenants of the area to get all of those people kicked out of their homes. And so there was a court case going on under this underlining court, this court case that was just like this current throughout that time period and throughout all these individual dramas. And there were lots of individual dramas. In Gatsby is really old money and new money. In 1945, if you're Black and wealthy, is probably new money. And so in this case, it's the business community and the Hollywood community. The Black business people thought that the Black Hollywood people were demeaning the entire race with the roles that they were taking. The Black Hollywood community thought that the Black business community needs to leave them the hell alone because they were taking the roles that they could and were at least opening doors for Black people to get roles. So there was that tension going on. At the same time, they had to work together to all try to keep their homes. And I do all of that while weaving in this romance of the Great Gatsby. So again, elevating this little known piece of Black history through this very familiar story. That's how I did it.
Well, that was very well said. It made me actually think of The Great Gatsby is taught in high school English classes across the country, and it's always like, what is the meaning of the green light? And you've taken it to a whole nother level and really analyzed the meanings behind that story and put it in a new setting. So, I mean, kudos to you for taking that challenge on. Well, let's transition over to Alina, just because Alina deals with some similar topics. Set around the same time period, deals with issues of race and of a Jewish woman married to or dating a African American man. Talk about the setting that takes place in your novel and how you deal with those issues.
Well, this is actually my 19th book, but I've only written 3 historical fiction novels. And my first historical fiction, which was called The Nesting Dolls, was set in the Soviet Union during the 1930s, the 1970s, and present day Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. And the feedback that I got from readers was they were really fascinated with the 1930s section, because while for obvious reasons, Western Europe gets the bulk of the press of what was going on in the 1930s and 1940s, people said to me, I cannot believe what was going on in the Soviet Union in the 1930s and the 1940s. I never heard about it. So when I did my first book for History Through Fiction, My Mother's Secret, a novel of the Jewish Autonomous Region, I set it primarily in the 1930s in the Soviet Union because that's what people were interested in. And there, a very small part of it was the fact that there were Americans who in the 1930s moved to the Soviet Union. And the feedback I got from readers there was, no, I don't believe it. It couldn't have happened. I mean, yes, it did. Speaking of African Americans, Paul Robeson made many very well publicized visits to the Soviet Union. And so I wanted to write a story of Americans who moved to the Soviet Union, but I had to give them a reason. And I started thinking about who would in the 1950s, because in the 1930s it was one thing. In the 1930s there was a depression on, and people were saying there's work in Eastern Europe. So you can see why people would move. But in the 1950s, America is in its full flower. I mean, it's really its first era of their truly a world superpower. And I know while obviously not everybody was living a Leave It to Beaver lifestyle, the fact is it was not the depression in the 1930s. So why would Americans pick up and move to the Soviet Union? And then I looked around my house and I saw my husband, who also lives there. And my husband is African American, and we have been together for almost 27 years now. And what we like to say is by the time we got together, nobody cared. We have some neighbors who live right below us, and they were married 40 years ago. That's when people cared. And so we were talking about the fact that there was a time, I mean, we still get some pushback, although we were married almost 20 years before I got my first shove in the subway. So that was actually, we made some really good time for us being together. But the fact is, when people, interracial couples who got together when it really mattered, that would have been the 1950s in the United States. And as I mentioned, what if you are a soap opera actor on the radio and the show transitions to television and you lose your job, and your girlfriend, who happens to be the producer of the show and is a white Jewish woman, she quits in protest, and they try to mount a Marxist version of Othello. If anybody would like to do a Marxist read of Othello, it's actually quite possible, down to the fact that Othello is the name in the hero, but Iago actually has a larger number of lines, and you can read that as a parable of class and race and everything else. But they don't have any success mounting it in the United States, either in white theaters or in the American Negro Theater. The Negro Theater of Harlem was around at the time, but nobody's interested. And then the Soviet Union throws, remember, a pro-democracy festival, and they are invited to perform there. And when they arrive there, they are feted like the celebrities that they are, and they are told, well, you know, the Soviet Union outlawed racism. The Soviet Union outlawed sexism. The Soviet Union outlawed anti-Semitism. And these are two people who really want to believe this. And because they are treated as celebrities and because they are kept away from what is really going on in the country, they believe it. And they move to the Soviet Union.
Well, yeah,
I've,
I'm sorry,
I've
go
read
ahead.
her- I've read her book. We've read each other's books. It's so enlightening and fascinating. And you really do begin to, you can really clearly see how people who are just under the constant stress of, can I get a Black people who is like, can I do this? Or a couple, or an interracial couple, can I do this? Is this going to be okay? Is this going to be received? If somebody tells you there's a way to get away from that constant stress, you could go here. And the book just makes that so clear and so enlightening. It's fascinating. So
Thank you.
Well, and just the fact that it does take place over 3 generations really shows both the change and the lack of change, and it shows those new challenges that we're faced with all the time, from 1939 with Rose originally to her granddaughter in 2012. Well, let's go next to Marie. Before I do, we did get a question from Kate. I will answer the questions here later in the event. So if you have questions, just hang on to them for now, and then I'll get to them in a little bit. Marie, you also deal with some very important societal issues as far as women's rights. I'm curious if you can kind of give us a little bit of context for these women, who they are. They just read The Feminine Mystique. What was it like for them as they realized the lessons in that novel, in that book?
Well, I think the place to start is to tell you where I got the idea from the book. So my mom is 92 years old, and she is kind of a force of nature. And she's an avid reader. About 3 years ago, we were talking about books when The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan came up, and she said, I don't know if I ever told you, but that book changed my life. And so I said, you hadn't, and please enlighten me. And, within just moments, I knew that I had the idea for a really good, potentially great novel from this. So the characters are not my mother, but certainly my conversations with her and other research, obviously, and, informed what the characters are feeling and experiencing. Just to introduce them. So they are all living in this planned community, and it's a really planned community. It's called Concordia. And in a way, the community itself is almost a character in the book. It's kind of a metaphor for, the ideas in this very, very planned community. If everybody just conforms and follows the rules and everybody goes along and does the same thing, there will be, as Concordia, you may remember your Latin is, harmony, peace, agreement. Everyone will be happy, except of course they're not, if you dig down not too far. And so that's sort of what's going on. These women are doing everything that society says that they are supposed to do. Although I have 4 characters, probably my most important character is Margaret, named in homage to my mom. And Margaret is 33 years old. She has 3 kids. She has a husband who is gainfully employed. And so according to what society is telling women at that moment, she's got it all, right? She's got the husband, the kids, the dream home, and the station wagon. She should be happy. And she isn't. And she's keeping that as a secret to herself because it actually feels kind of like a guilty secret. And which was, I think, very much what my mother was experiencing at that time. And so when she came along and read this book, what happened was she felt, as we would say in modern parlance, she felt seen. She knew it just wasn't her because up until that moment, she'd thought, oh my gosh, there's something really wrong with me. Everybody else is happy and I'm not. So it must be me. It must be my fault. And, in that period of time, of course, when women went to their doctors and said, there's something wrong with me, there were many, many doctors who were willing to say, yep, there certainly is, which kind of brings me up to one of my next characters, Charlotte Gustafson. Now, she was raised in New York, but she has ended up through a series of circumstances in Concordia. She's not too thrilled about being stuck in the Virginia suburbs, for one thing, but she has other issues. She's a frustrated artist. Certainly that was a really difficult, it's always been hard for women to break into art, but even more so at this period of time. She comes from quite a lot of family money, but she doesn't have control over that money. Her husband does, even though he married into the family. And Charlotte is one of those persons who, her psychiatrist and others think, yep, there's definitely a problem with her, and they've got a pill for that. Which is something that, people may remember there was a pill that was very popular called Milltown by its sort of colloquial name, but Mother's Little Helpers, whatever. So she's going through some of that. She's the most fun character to write. She's really, she's sort of a pot stirrer, which I really appreciate about her. And then my next character is a woman named Viv. Viv is actually the only one of the 4 main characters who had what we would consider a career before she got married. She was a nurse. In fact, she was a combat nurse during the Second World War, and she was a good one. But she met her husband during the war, and she always wanted a family. So as the book opens, she's got 6 kids, and she's wanted these children, and she is happy being a mother, except as the kids got a little older, she too is having this kind of longing for something she cannot quite identify, which I think is a lot of what was going on in that time period. My next character is Bitsy. She's the youngest one of the group. She's only 23. She does not have a family at this point, although she is trying to have a family, and that is sort of fraught for its own reasons. She grew up in horse country. Her dad was a barn manager at a stud farm, and she always was around horses, loved animals, and she wanted to be a veterinarian. And she was very smart and studied really hard to try and make that happen. But again, in 1963, for a woman to become a vet was trying to push a really big boulder up a really steep hill. So she has done what she thinks is maybe the next best thing, which is something a lot of women did in that period. She has married a veterinarian. Well, that partnership isn't working out quite the way she had imagined it might. So I have all of these women, and they are all very different, but the book is what brings them together. And I think that that is something that was really true in this period of history. And let me be clear, I'm really aware of the fact that there has been criticism of the feminine mystique, and in some senses, it really hasn't aged very well. Betty Friedan left a whole lot of people out of the conversation, and yet it certainly was a catalyst for something that happened with a lot of people. And as I say in the very first page of my book, it didn't solve the problem, but it shone a light on it, and it put allowing women to help find each other and their voices. And that has been the start of every revolution. So that's what the book is, kind of in a nutshell.
Well, and a great exclamation mark there at the end. That's how every revolution has started. And what a cast of characters. I think that's just such a fabulous way to highlight that the different circumstances women found themselves in, and yet they were all moved by that book.
Yeah. There was just, so one of the books I used for my research that was so interesting and very helpful, I think it may be out of print, but if you can find a copy, it was called A Strange Stirring by Stephanie Coons. And it really talked about the feminine mystique, the response to it, the criticisms as well as the positives. But it gave a lot of, kind of firsthand accounts that were really helpful to me for how women responded to it at that time. And that was just a fabulous, fabulous nonfiction book if you're interested.
I recently talked to Megan Church, who wrote a book called The Mad Wife. Are you familiar with that?
I have that on my desk right now. It's
Okay.
on the pile. So I'm waiting to read it. It looks great.
Yeah. Well, Chad, let's go to you. You talked about finding a gravesite on your property. My question when you said that was, were you looking for a subject to write a book about, or did it really just lead you down a path where you had to write it?
Yeah, I mean, it really just, I think both things are kind of true. It was kind of happenstance that a woman pulled into our driveway asking for directions, and we live in like an agricultural area, so it's not uncommon for that to happen. And it was actually on Mother's Day, and I asked her where she was trying to get, and she started asking me about this grave in the woods. And at the time, I had enrolled in my MFA program, and we had like rotating writing requirements. So as I learned different bits of the story, I just kind of wrote what I could see at that time, like given the research, and kind of had like this stepping stone narrative that then I like backfilled and went back and researched each perspective. So similar to Marie, it's like it's a big cast of characters. Um, and I think the goal of having all the different perspectives was like we're all kind of talking about these cultural churns that happen where kind of like nobody's in control, but everybody's kind of contributing in their own way. Like you're making your own choices day to day, and that's like incrementally changing your given community, and then that your community change the community next to you, and so on. So it doesn't follow one character. He's kind of a shadow in the background, but it touches on all the different ways that the Civil War caused an increasing churn in society. So I was able to just use that character based on the places that he had actually been to, Fredericksburg, and then the arrest that they actually tried to do here, and then him actually being hung at Fort Mifflin. I was able to use kind of like the course of his travels as a way to daisy chain all those different perspectives together, because he just kind of like passes through the background. And um, in another interview, I kind of distilled it down to like, when you're researching the Civil War, you can get this feeling that like, oh, it took place at Gettysburg, or it took place at Fredericksburg, or wherever. But really it was, and I was writing it during the pandemic, it was happening everywhere. Like, just because people weren't on the front lines doesn't mean that the women didn't have to figure out how to run the farm back home, or like it changed medicine. It changed, there's colleges that don't have graduating classes from those years. It just changed like every facet, how we view death, how we like funerary practices and stuff. It just changed so many facets of um, society so rapidly. And I just felt like I was living in kind of like a cousin time through the pandemic, because it was like, wow, the world's never going to be the same again after this 18 months or whatever. And um, so we're still kind of sorting through that. But I thought using all those different, having Hal, the man whose grave started it all, having him be like a shadow, linking all the different perspectives together, helped like fill in the overall picture, so that it became kind of like in every person's view of the Civil War, and not just like this gallant fighter who did whatever at whatever battle. It's actually kind of inconsequential in the course of the book. There's no like real active fighting, and there's no real hero. It's just kind of, as I say to my students, it's just kind of people being dudes during the Civil War. It's kind of what it amounts to.
Well, that actually reminds me of what I'm reading right now, How to Dodge a Cannonball by Denard Doyle. I would recommend that for you. It's kind of got the same vibe to it, where it's not about the battles, it's about the people and the real experiences, and it's very cynical. There's no glorification in it. But,
Yeah, and it's like hard. It's weird. It's like grappling with that as I was writing it, because you want to be like, not to get all dolce et decorum, but like you want to be like, oh, this is what Americans did, and it's like it's so much more sticky and complicated than that, and so many of the puzzle pieces don't fit quite so easily, and it's not as rosy as you would wish it was. But showing like the people boots on the ground, just trying to maintain their day to day. I feel like I mean, the feedback is that it really makes people feel like they're time traveling to the era, which is what I was going for. I mean, it's a big compliment when I hear that.
yeah, definitely. Oh, well, I want to go back to Kyra and Alina, but before I do, let's start again with Marie, because Marie does have to leave us a little bit early, so I want to get her back in here. Before I do that, I'm going to post the landing page one more time. If any of these books have piqued your interest, go ahead and click on that link and go to the landing page, and you can order the book. So Marie, this actually could apply to any of you, certainly Alina and Kyra. I wonder, you talked about, well, I can't remember how you put it, but these issues are still here. You said that it didn't solve anything. It raised the issues and brought it to the forefront. But certainly we're still grappling with all these issues of rights for various groups of people. What do you think can be gleaned from going back to this specific time period and seeing what those people went through compared to what we are struggling with today?
Well, I think one of the first things is to remember how fresh the freedoms that we do have right now are. You know, I've met, I just, well, I'm still not done. I've been on about a 5-week national book tour, and I'm home for a week, and then I'm going to do one more week starting on Friday. But I've met so many young people at my events who didn't know that their mothers and their grandmothers couldn't necessarily get a credit card without a male cosigner, didn't have a right to contraception in the case of, married people until 1965, but in the case of single people until 1974. I mean, they just had no idea of this. So I think it's always really a good idea to be, first of all, aware from a baseline of history, and particularly a history that has changed so much in such a short period of time, because everything that is young and fresh is always more fragile. So I think it's just important to be aware of that. As far as the book, I think something that I really wanted to make clear is that part of the reason these characters are able to really transform their lives, find the fulfillment and that thing they didn't even know they longed, is because they band together. Because we really do need to join forces when we are trying to make change or hold the line or keep the changes that we have fought so hard for from going backwards. And so there is value in community from all kinds of level, but there's also, it's also community is power. And so this is a really, really important thing that women, in my book in particular, women supporting women really make life better for everybody. When women challenge and champion one another, lives are transformed for the better, society is transformed for the better, and the world is transformed for the better. This is my kind of my basic assumption. I think there's something there for people to take away.
And how difficult was it for you to kind of express those themes? Because when writing a novel, there's all kinds of craft elements of plot and character, but then there's the very deeper meaning behind all that. Was that something you intentionally worked toward, or did it just happen?
I think it happens for me. And, this is my 22nd novel, so I've been doing this a long time. The basic, the basic things that are important in a novel is like show them, don't tell them. Nobody wants to be told what to do. But I think what's wonderful about fiction is when you create a character that's engaging, people are smart. They're going to pick up on the things that you leave there for them. So you don't have to really pound the pulpit so much. They will see in the natural interaction of the characters what it is you're trying to say. And I guess I don't go into it with like, this is the theme. Story for me must come first, but out of story, themes absolutely emerge. And I think it's a powerful way to have them do so.
Of course, yeah, that's very well said. That 22nd novel, you know how to show and have the readers, draw their own conclusions and thereby have a more meaningful experience from the novel itself.
That's the hope.
Alina, can you talk to that a little bit? Because I mean, I already kind of pointed out briefly that there is some very intentional juxtaposition between your characters. Can you talk about the kind of the meaning behind that, or what a reader might take away from seeing Rojava in 2012 versus Spain in 1939?
Well, I agree with what Marie said, is that story comes first. I'm the kind of person, I feel I'm one with Alice in Wonderland. What's the point of a story without dialogue or pictures? I don't need long lyrical explanations. I want the story. I want you to tell me what happened. So first and foremost, what is it Samuel Goldwyn said? If you want to send a message, use Western Union. Otherwise, write a story. So I was starting out in the very first, the prologue is the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which went to Spain to fight the fascists. And my character, she's 17 years old and she's full of enthusiasm. And then, of course, that she gets there towards the end. She gets there towards 1939 when they're relatively crushed. And she returns to the United States, but she's a true believer. And what was interesting for me is someone, I was born in the former Soviet Union, so I'm surrounded to this day by people who were horrifically traumatized by life in the Soviet Union. So for me to put my head in a place where someone is a true believer, someone who believes that when the Soviet Union says we've outlawed racism and sexism and anti-Semitism, they don't see what is actually there in front of them. And that's where the title comes from. It's Go On Pretending. She wanted to believe so badly. Kyra had mentioned the point earlier about when you're constantly under the stress, you just want someone to make it stop. It's sort of like when you're in pain, you just want someone to make the pain go away, and you're not particularly interested in how it's going to happen. So one of the things that I wanted to address, and why the theme of the book is Go On Pretending, is that everyone wants to see the world as they wish it were, rather than the way that it actually is. And one of the themes that I did want to address, whether it is the Soviet Union or then later Rose's, that's the lead character's daughter, when she returns to the United States and she ends up in a libertarian commune. And then when her granddaughter goes to Syria and to Rojava, everyone is looking for a quick fix. And the issues that we've all brought up here, you know, Marie and Kyra and Chad, is these are not issues that can have a quick fix. So anyone who tells you, oh, I have the solution for that, I'm going to snap my fingers and I'm going to make it work, you know it's not true. I do a lot of writing about media, and everybody's talking about media literacy and how to teach kids, but also adults too, how to understand what's in the media. And one of my guidelines is if you read an article or watch a TV show, a 2-minute newscast, and you agree with absolutely everything they say and they validate every opinion that you have, it's got to be wrong. There's no way that that can be the case. So the theme that goes through all three characters and all the various places where they go, as everyone would love to have a solution. And in fact, I don't know, those of you who have younger children, whether you remember watching the movie The Incredibles over and over again. And at one point, Mr. Incredible says, why can't the world just stay saved? And that's what all of these characters are looking for. Why can't the world just stay saved? Why can't there be a quick fix? And the answer is because these issues are way too complicated to have a quick fix.
Well, thank you, Alina. Yeah, that's offers some very good perspective there. Marie, I know you've got to take off,
I
so thanks so much for
apologize.
joining us.
I'm looking forward to reading all your books, so thank you. It's been fun to
Thank
be
you,
with
Marie.
everybody. Sorry I have to bounce.
No worries.
Could I build on what Alina was just saying?
Of course.
There's a question in the chat asking about historical, like basically the context of writing in the genre historical fiction. And what she just said really rings true about like you can't write about the way that you wish it were. You have to write about the way that it was, which I'm sure Kyra was probably up to her eyebrows in research getting everything right. But that's really the thing that I learned the most, and why I think people are resonating with my book. It was very tedious in the writing process, but and honestly, you know, I'm a white guy named Chad living on a farmstead. I'm, you know, like me writing Two Runaway Slaves. I mean, I sent that chapter to probably 100 different people, or even me writing there's the perspective of the pregnant wife, like who doesn't know whether her husband's coming home or not, and now she's like shifting from the Victorian, you know, women's role to having to take over all the farm work and make sure that the planting gets in for the spring and having to calculate the yield and all that kind of stuff. And um, you know, I could go back through my phone when my wife and my two sister-in-laws were all pregnant at the same time and remember what life was like as a pregnant lady. But I've never lived a day as a pregnant woman. So um, having to go back, not just to be like, oh, what date did the Battle of Fredericksburg start on? Like, that wasn't even in my mind. It was like a pregnant woman's at home with a toddler, and she doesn't know if her husband's coming back, and she has to use the bathroom frequently, and the bathroom's outside of the house. So, like, so the chapter starts with her holding the outhouse door open, and she's like looking through the window to see what the toddler's doing inside. But um again, it's like what Alina just said, it's not the way we wish it were. I had to do the research to get it. This is what I learned about historical fiction. The littlest details correct are what makes the looking glass. So again, like, people feel like they're time traveling. It becomes like um much more vivid, like you're living in the time period. You're not just like looking at a postcard from the time period. So I think that was well said, Miss Selena.
I would tack on to both of that. One, Chad, what Chad just said about Annalena, about things being as they actually are versus how we wish they would be. I feel like right now there is a conversation in this country about presenting history as we wish it was versus how
Yeah.
it was. And I do think that as historical fiction novelists, we have the opportunity to offer a more complex picture that is fiction but real in terms of the setting and the issues. And nuanced, and to elevate that more complex narrative at a time when there are a lot of people in power trying to simplify everything. In terms of what Alina was saying, it's funny, there is, in my book, there's a lawyer, Lauren Miller, and in the 1930s, he actually, with Langston Hughes and a whole bunch of other people, was invited to participate in what was supposed to be the first truly interracial film filmed in the Soviet Union, because it was going to be called Black and White. And for various reasons, Stalin put an end to that. It was a whole
There's
thing.
so many stories that could end with, for various reasons,
Stalin
Stalin.
put an end, right, exactly. But they didn't understand that what they knew is when they came, they were treated like celebrities. And Lauren Miller, who had to cross the country to get to New York to get to the boat, which means that that's a harrowing journey for Black men. He was with Langston Hughes trying to figure out where we can eat, where are we going to be? It's just like it was difficult, and then they get to the Soviet Union, they're treated like celebrities, they're completely walled off, they don't speak Russian, so everything they're hearing is through an interpreter. And what he wrote home to his fiance at the time is, in Tsarist Russia, they had race riots against the Jews that would make the Ku Klux Klan green with envy. But now Jews have complete rights. In 15 years, they solved this entire problem. It's just gone. And that idea of like, you see, there was a quick fix. It's right here. They're telling me, and look what they've done, right? And of course, that's appealing. This idea that, oh, if we just do this, we can make this issue. Look, they did it with Jewish people, so why can't they do it with us here in America? We just have to do what the Soviet Union is doing, and everything's going to be okay. And this stress of figure out where I can be and be safe and be respected would just be gone. And we could be as fortunate as the Jews of the Soviet Union.
They were the end.
But it's so, as obviously as he grew older and learned more about what was actually going on, those feelings began to dissipate by the late 30s, early 40s, and he had a more complex picture of it. But you can understand why that narrative would be so appealing, this like done, in terms of the relevancy in this the issues, um, and trying not to lose accomplishments. I think one of the things that really fascinated me, one of the things that really fascinated me about this time period and this story was it was indicative of a centuries long cyclical pattern that African Americans have had in America, where we make enormous social rights strides, right? Like Reconstruction, we're in national office, and then you lose the right not only to be in office but to vote in half the country, in half the states. There was, everybody thinks that you know everyone thinks they know the first Black baseball player to be in the majors, but the first Black baseball player to be in the majors was Moses Fleetwood Walker. That was the 1800s, and then they segregated the major leagues. There was constant this move forward, and then someone sort of pulls it back, right? And so and that we've seen this again and again and again. And here you had these African Americans who have moved into these mansions that they purchased, and then being told you can't be here. And it's this constant struggle of trying to figure out what you need to do to prove that you are worthy of your achievements. Not even what's coming, but what you've already earned. And I do think that's something that continues. When you say, why is this guy in this position? Why is he, okay, I'm gonna get a tiny bit political here, but why is this man the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, who was a 5-star general and ran this many combat missions and served this long? Is it because he's Black? It's like, what does he have to do to prove that he's worthy of that job? That it's not because he's Black, but he has this resume that's 20 pages long. What does he have to do to prove that he's worthy of that achievement? So that's an ongoing conversation. And I just found it really interesting to explore it in 1945 in the light of what's happening today. And lastly, to Chad's point, getting all the details right of the time. I mean, I found that I had to not just research 1945 to really get these characters right, particularly the real life characters as well as the fictional ones. I had to really start like 1900. I needed to get yeah, right. You have to go back. You have to they grew up through, right? Yeah.
Because nothing happens in a vacuum. Every character is a product of what came before.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you have to study a lifetime of history to really be able to fully realize that one moment in time that you're trying to depict. And
well, I want to. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's fascinating and interesting, and it's a lot of work.
Well, I wanted to jump on something you said, because the other thing is when people tend to look at history or really anything, there's a tendency to want to sort people into good guys and bad guys. This person did everything right. This person did everything wrong. This person's motives were pure. This person's motives were all evil. And if you dig anywhere below the surface, you see that's not the case. And what I loved about your book, Kyra, is that just because someone did a good thing doesn't necessarily make them a good person. People can do good things for the wrong reasons. People can do wrong things for the right reasons. And I think that's something that history, through fiction, can really do, is they can point out, that we were talking about how it's not a quick fix. It's also not as black and white, if I may coin a phrase, is that characters, there have been characters who have done good things for terrible motives. And just as a sense that there are people who ended up doing terrible things when their motives started well. So one of the things I loved about your book, Kyra, is that you have, it's not just all these people are good, all these people are bad. And the fact is, even within the monolith that is a group, there's lots and lots of different opinions. And I think you do a really good job of showing that everyone had their reasons for taking the position that they did.
Thank you so much. You have no idea how much I had to battle for that. I mean, because there are a lot of people who really just want their good guys to just be good guys. You know, they don't
Yeah.
want them to be flawed. And I am such a believer in flaws. I really feel like if you don't show the flaws, you're not creating a person. Because we are all complicated people. We have our nuances, we have our strengths, we have our weaknesses, we have our flaws, we have our attributes. And if you don't allow for that, then you're promoting an ideal, and that destroys the humanity of the person you're trying to describe. And but it's not a viewpoint that everybody in publishing has.
Well, I
Yeah,
have
so
gotten feedback from readers who said to me that they don't like my books because I show women as having flaws. And if I really want to tell a powerful, empowering female story, I shouldn't show women having flaws. Now, my daughter, she's 18. She has this phrase which she says, "I believe in women's rights and women's wrongs." So, and that's the same kind of thing. How can you tell the true story of women and what they lived if they were all paragons of virtue and saints? If they all didn't get angry the fact that the toddler, as you were saying, Chad, is running around while she's pregnant and trying to make it to the outhouse and trying to bring the crops in and trying to bring the wood in.
yeah. So even the like primary research subject, Cal, um, I was able to find that his father-in-law actually bought the property. He didn't buy it. Like he married a woman who was 7 years older, so her family had more money than him, and he was a German, first generation German immigrant. But um, he basically doesn't, and this is where when we first got on the call, we were talking about how these tent post things about the individual, and then you got to fill in and make up, create the in between the blank spaces. So he doesn't like sign up because it's like, oh, I'm going to war, and I mean, there's not even really a hint of emancipation on his mind or anything. It's just kind of peer pressure. It's like everybody else his age was enlisting, and like it was a way for him to make a name because he was kind of like living on his father-in-law's land. And it's like, I'll go do this. And this, like now people will respect me. It's not like any gallant charge off to battle because he was so entrenched in his political views. Um, but I totally agree. It's like, and I mean, I'm a parent of little kids. I'm sure, like, if I told you some of the things that's going on in my life right now, Alina, because your kids are a little bit older, you'd be like, "Oh, he doesn't even know yet." Like we're like so swimming in the soup of immediacy. Like even now, when we look back at the pandemic, it's like, "Oh wow, like remember that? Like, how did I not even? I didn't even think of that." Like. So I think that's such a it takes so much more, or I shouldn't say more, but it's such an intense like craft of it to get all those details right. um you can't like just take liberties with everything. You have to have those tent post things because that's kind of what the audience is there for. They want to learn more about the historical era. So you have to have those so firmly in place so that then you can take the liberty of what you're creating in between and like build that trust with the audience.
Yeah, and Chad, you and I really worked on Henry and building that that juxtaposition of, is he a good guy or a bad guy? Is he treasonous, or is he someone who loves his family and is just trying to get home? And I think what Kyra was saying, that's kind of the essence of the characters you all are writing, that they can be more than one thing at the same time, and doesn't make them good or bad. It makes them human. Well, I mean, that went quick. That was a great conversation. We're up against the end of the hour. I'm sorry we didn't get any questions, too many questions from the audience. Chad did mention we had a question here from Kate, which I think essentially you guys kind of hashed out, because she was asking about difference between a historical fiction novel and a novel that just takes place in the past. But all of those topics, I think, really resonate to that question, because it doesn't, like, you don't have to be genre specific. You can set it in the past, whether it's about an event or not about a specific event. Even yesterday is history.
But if you're going to set it yesterday, you should have a reason for setting it yesterday.
Mhm.
That's something that I wanted to say. That if you are just setting it, even if, like, for instance, sometimes I think about, what's made writing, like I wrote a series of figure skating mysteries. And so sometimes I think about mysteries. You know what's really hard about mysteries these days? The internet and cell phones. So many plot points that you used to be able to get away with before the internet or cell phones, you can't do anymore. So you either have to think your way around it, or you set your story in the 1980s. And even that is a valid reason, but you have to have a reason other than just, I wrote a string of numbers down and here it is. Even if you love the fashion, even if you want to write about, women wearing pillbox hats, you have to have a reason for why you're setting it in that time period.
Yeah, how many horror movies are like, oops, no cell service here,
Yeah,
which
but you have to say it. You have to say it now. Or think of all the stories where somebody says, "Oh, I'm, your long lost such and such." Boop, boop, boop. Here's a picture. No, you're not. So you have to tell different stories.
There's like a thing about how many Seinfeld episodes would be ruined because of cell phones, because they're always like missing at each other at a restaurant or at a movie or whatever. And it's like, if they
Or
could
when
just
they're
text each other.
looking for the parking space, the first episode of
Yeah.
Seinfeld is really
Yes.
big. You just pushes a button, it goes boop, boop. Ah, there it is. Now what do we do for the other 23 minutes?
Yeah, exactly.
well, I'm happy to say that our YouTube live did work. Margaret Pinard's over there, and she made a comment about a book called Qualified by Sherry Dunn, about the employment gap. Looks like Kyra is familiar with that. So I want to thank everyone who attended the panel. I hope that you're interested in these books. Go ahead and check those out on the landing page that I posted there in the chat. Again, if you can't buy any books right now, just tell people about it on your social media. Put in a request at your library to get those books, in any way that you can spread the word will support these authors and their publishers.
It really matters. More than 3 people asking for a book at a library is usually enough to get a book ordered. So if you think you can't make a difference, asking just your local library, a handful of people, and they will order it.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I always wrap these up by asking our panelists why you wrote historical fiction instead of straight history. So let's start with you, Chad. Why historical fiction? What's the value of making this into a narrative?
I think a lot of what we discussed, I was just interested in, I didn't want all 100% factual people who existed. I wanted to kind of like live in the space a little bit and experiment with the different perspectives, because I think there's so much more to glean about that cultural churn when you check in with children who are trying to enlist, or women at home, or a deserter who comes across runaway slaves. There's just runaway enslaved Americans. There's so many different perspectives to tie in together, that like living in the space is almost more important than if this person actually existed at this time and said these actual words. It's more living in the space and kind of examining it and just opening your mind to kind of the nitty-gritty of the era.
Kyra, how about you? What's the value of historical fiction?
Well, I think that stories help us absorb information, hold on to information, and internalize information and ideas in a way that nothing else does. And I think you can see that in every culture in the world. Everybody has mythology, and there's a reason why they have the mythology. It's because you tell the story of this god or that god or whatever, and people understand the themes and the ideas behind it, and they hold on to it in a way that they don't if they had read a report. So I think we, as human beings, sort of continue that tradition, and I choose to. I think I reach more people by using storytelling to shed light on this period of time than I would again if I just wrote a book on 1945 Sugar Hill, because then I'm going to get just the people who are already really interested in that era. Now I can get people who are interested in good stories.
And Alina, you've answered this question before, so you'll have to find a clever way to change it around a little bit.
Well, every time I answer a variation on this, you laugh at me. So I'm going to answer it is that I will stand by this. Fight me. Historical fiction is the easiest genre to write because you don't have to make up events. You just look up events and then you make up a person to react to the events. So really, it's just pure laziness. I write historical fiction out of pure laziness. That way I don't have to come up with a story. The world has already done it for me.
Low-hanging fruit.
Well, and we're all a little wiser because of it. So thank you for being lazy. Well, thanks again to everyone. I really enjoyed this conversation, and congratulations on all of your books. And I'll see you next time on What's New in Historical Fiction.
Thank you for having us, Colin.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for getting on.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Good night, everybody.